Well, it's 2012. I failed my mission to play all of those retro games in a year. I got through 133 of them, but I'm afraid that's it. No more year of retro gaming. It's over. Thanks for watching. Nah, just kidding. I'm sure I wouldn't be alone in saying that Secret of Mana was the first real RPG I ever played. This was the game that introduced me to the concept of HP, MP and grinding levels, and when I first played it I'd never experienced a video game with such an immense and involving story. It's also the first game I ever bought that I'd never played previously, which when you're 15 is a pretty big gamble since games generally retailed for $100 back then. The game was bought purely on its glowing reputation in the magazines and the fact that it was apparently like Zelda, which was pretty much my all-time favourite game at the time. But let's go back a few years. In 1991, Squaresoft in Japan released a Game Boy game called Seiken Densetsu Final Fantasy Gaiden. Translated, that means Legend of the Holy Sword Final Fantasy Side Story. Its PAL name was Mystic Quest, and in America it was Final Fantasy Adventure. And as you can see, this little game bared more than a passing resemblance to Link's Awakening, but it had a few Final Fantasy elements thrown in as well. When the time came to make the official sequel, Seiken Densetsu 2, the Super Famicom was the machine of choice. Its Western name, of course, was Secret of Mana, referencing the magical force in the game's story. Looking at Seiken 2's plot today, it could hardly be more cliched. Orphan boy in village raised by the elder finds a sword in a stone by a waterfall. He pulls the sword out and by doing so curses the village, so he's banished. And he soon finds out though that by removing the sword he's labelled himself the hero of Mana, and after enlisting the help of a cheeky sprite and a blonde girl with attitude, he begins to unravel a plot by the ancient sorcerer Thanatos to raise a long sunken Mana fortress into the sky and call down the Mana beast to destroy the world. Yeah, spoilers, whatever. Even though this plot is practically cookie cutter by today's standards, you have to understand that when I first played it, I'd never experienced a story like this, so it felt completely fresh and ridiculously compelling. I even began to novelise it, and then I gave up a few chapters in. It's interesting that you can choose which of the other two party members to collect first, depending on where you go. It doesn't make any real difference to the story, but it's a cool little branching path anyway. This would be massively expanded on in the following Seiken game, where you could choose which character you would recruit in whichever order you wanted. The graphics still look pretty nice, although there seem to be quite a few frames of animation missing. The music though, now this is something special. Well, except for the dwarf's village, that's just annoying. Secret of Mana's composer was Hiroki Kikuta. Amazingly, he hasn't gone on to have a legendary composing career like Uematsu or Shimomura. After Seiken 3 and a few other obscure Japanese-only games, he's been practically unheard of, but his amazing melodies set the mood and feel brilliantly, and this has gone down in history as one of gaming's most revered soundtracks. I reckon the thing that's probably aged the worst is the battle system. It's not broken, but it often doesn't work as well as it should, which was easier to forgive back in 1994. It's not turn-based, but it has a similar kind of concept. After swinging your weapon, you have a cooldown time to wait until you can swing it at full power again. Of course, you can just do a crazy hack and slash like Zelda, but that's not going to do any significant damage. Before long, you'll figure out a good attack-retreat pattern. Unfortunately, the AI characters that accompany you aren't very smart, and they'll constantly be getting themselves into trouble and killed or stuck behind things. The system mostly works once you get the hang of it, but it can be very frustrating to spend ages charging up an attack only to have it completely miss the enemy for no apparent reason at all. Monsters can also cast completely unblockable magic spells on you wherever you are on the screen, which can also get annoying. Once you begin to learn magic, the sprite character can cast offensive magic and the girl can heal and buff. I found that for the most part, bosses consisted of finding a weakness and spamming magic until it was dead. That always seemed to be the most effective method anyway. There's a lot of funny characters you meet along the way in this game. The dwarf Watts will upgrade your weapon, the purple cat shopkeeper Neko pops up in all kinds of places to sell you stuff or save your game, but the greedy crook sells everything for double price. So not worth it. There's also the occasional Final Fantasy reference, in particular the Moogle village. This was my first introduction to Moogles, since in Australia the first Final Fantasy release was still about 3.5 years away. And Secret of Mana has bosses. Lots and lots of bosses. 40 full boss battles, in fact. Quite a few of them are just colour swaps from other bosses, but you're never going very far in this game without coming up against a boss. They all drop an orb when you beat them, which you use for powering up your weapons. The journey takes you across a vast world filled with the usual RPG staples: the desert, the iceland, the forest, the city, etc, etc. It really is a good-sized quest though. This is not a game to be finished overnight. There's lots of random little subplots as well. Like when you beat the Frost Gigas, only to discover that it was Santa Claus all along. Yeah, I don't get how that fits in either. In the latter part of the game, a giant talking bird at the top of a mountain sends you on a wild goose chase looking for the Sage Jock, eventually sending you to the Republic of Taznica, surely the only republic in the world with a king in charge. I believe that's called a kingdom. Anyway, as well as your trusty legs to take you places, you enlist the help of cannons. Yeah, surely that'd hurt a bit, wouldn't it? And eventually you get your very own dragon, Flemmy. Flemmy's awesome. If he was in a Final Fantasy game, he'd be an airship. The journey finishes in the resurrected Mana Fortress, which is gargantuan. It's a massively huge area that puts any other dungeon in the game to shame. You finish with an epic showdown with Thanatos' true form, and then the Mana Beast itself. Oh yeah, spoilers, whatever. One of the best things about Secret of Mana is that it's got a really strong multiplayer aspect, which was unheard of for a role-playing game like this. This was well before MMOs. Back in the day I didn't really have anyone to play with, so I just went it solo. But a couple of years ago I convinced some friends to play through it with the three of us. Thankfully you don't need a multi-tap with the Virtual Console version, and we had a really good time. For the sake of decency, I won't tell you what we named our characters. The main thing that's a bit annoying is that whenever someone opens up their ring menu, the whole game pauses and everyone else has to wait for them, but mostly it's a really fun multiplayer game. So, Secret of Mana, Seiken Densetsu ni. How does it hold up today? Amazingly well, to be honest. It's not perfect, and a few of its gameplay quirks don't sit so well in the 21st century, but you can't get past the fact that it's still a fun game with a simple but engaging storyline, lots of wonderful locations to visit, amazing music, and the bonus of multiplayer gaming. No doubt, it stands the test of time. Two platformers next week, but two very different experiences. Donkey and Diddy go all CG, and Capcom shows us how demons get revenge. See you then. Peace out.